The Falklands, also known as the Malvinas in Spanish, are a remote archipelago in the South Atlantic. Although they offer stunning landscapes, they are actually known for something else: war. More specifically, the Falklands War of 1982, when Argentina attempted to take control of these islands from the United Kingdom. The war lasted for almost 2.5 months and ultimately ended with the Argentinians being defeated by British forces. During the fighting, almost 1,000 people lost their lives, yet the dispute over these islands remains unresolved and continues to strain the relationship between London and Buenos Aires. But why do both Argentina and the United Kingdom claim these islands? How did the conflict escalate into war, and could it ever happen again? To find the answers, we first need to explore the confusing history of these islands. Throughout most of their history, the only conflict that raged on the Falklands or Malvinas was the one between the penguins and the Falkland fox, which is now extinct, so I guess the penguins won that one. Humans, however, were not living on these islands since they are incredibly remote, so they remained the dominion of penguins and foxes until the European discovery of the Americas in 1492. Soon, European explorers raced to map and claim this new world. Which explorer exactly discovered the Falklands or Malvinas is not clear and still heavily debated. But despite being discovered sometime between 1500 and 1600, the European powers mostly ignored these islands, as they were busy colonizing the more attractive parts of the New World. But eventually, some Europeans began to take interest in them. In 1764, the French established the first recorded colony on the eastern main island. Funnily enough, the very next year the British arrived as well, establishing their own colony on the western island. Unsurprisingly, both sides were pretty unhappy when they learned about each other's presence, as both claimed the entire archipelago. News of this quarrel eventually reached the Spanish. Although they have never settled the islands before, they thought of them as Spanish territory because of the Treaty of Tordesillas, which basically divided the new world between Spain and Portugal, and the Falklands or Malvinas happened to be in a section awarded to Spain. The Spanish then first complained to the French about it. As they were close allies at the time, France agreed to sell the colony to them. A Spanish governor then took over from the French and eventually encountered the British on the western island, who had no desire to leave. So, drastic measures were taken. In 1770, the Spanish governor raised a small army and took the British settlement over by force, then expelled the inhabitants from the island. This caused a severe crisis between Spain and Britain, but war was avoided after diplomatic settlement was reached, which once and for all solved the dispute. Ha, just kidding, of course it didn't. While the diplomatic agreement allowed the British settlers to return and restore their colony, both sides developed different views about who actually owned them. According to the British, the return of British settlers confirmed British ownership, while the Spanish and later the Argentines believed that Spain owned them, while the British colonists were only being tolerated. This strange situation would only last for a few more years, however. In 1774, the British decided to abandon the colony because of economic reasons and increasing tensions in North America. Before leaving, they left a plaque which declared the islands to be British territory. The Spanish then stayed on the islands until 1811. They also left a plaque before their departure, which declared it Spanish territory. And just like that, the penguins were in charge again, but not for long. In the early 1800s, Spain was faced with revolutions across the American colonies, which ultimately led to the creation of numerous independent states, with one of those being the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata, the precursor state to modern-day Argentina. From the viewpoint of the United Provinces, they had inherited much of the territory of the former Spanish viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata upon independence, which they believed also included the Falklands or Malvinas. To press this claim, they sent the first expedition to the now uninhabited islands in 1820 and established a small colony a few years later. But this colony wouldn't last long, and oh boy, you won't believe why. In 1831, fishermen and seal hunters from the United States were active in this area, which the local Argentine governor didn't like at all. So he arrested some of them and confiscated their ships. Pretty bad move in hindsight, because when the Americans found out, they sent a warship which destroyed the colony's fortifications, took their leaders as prisoners, declared the entire archipelago a government-free zone, refused to elaborate further, and then just left. Wow. Most Argentine settlers left after this incident, and later attempts to re-establish a functioning colony were not very successful. Mostly some gaucho, the South American equivalent to the North American cowboy, remained. Then, in 1833, the British returned to press their own claim again. They kicked the last Argentinian commander out and built a new colony, where settlers from mostly Scotland and Wales made the Falklands or Malvinas their home. The Argentinians formally protested, but to no avail. The British Empire was not only more powerful, but had also become an essential economic partner for the young Argentine state, which increasingly became dependent on Britain. Over the next 100 years, the British presence continued to grow, and the Falklands or Malvinas became a base for administering other remote areas in this part of the world, like the island of South Georgia, the Sandwich Islands and British Antarctica, all of which the Argentinians later claimed as well. The disagreement became a more serious issue after World War II. As the British Empire underwent decolonization, Argentina argued that it had to hand over the Falklands or Malvinas to them alongside all territories associated with them. The pressure further increased in 1965 when the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 2065, which called for negotiations on this issue. And the chances for Britain ceding the islands to Argentina were actually not that bad. For many British politicians, the Falklands or Malvinas seemed to be more trouble than worth it, but not everyone agreed. Firstly, the local population was almost entirely of British descent and unwilling to become part of Argentina, and secondly, the islands were directly tied to Britain's maritime and Antarctic claims. Although a few possible compromises were proposed, they were either rejected by Argentina or by the islanders themselves, and so negotiations stalled. Then, in 1976, a coup took place in Argentina, which saw a repressive military dictatorship take power in Buenos Aires, known as the Junta. The Junta quickly recognized that regaining the Falklands or Malvinas was a valuable and uniting cause, so plans were discussed for how to deal with this issue. One popular plan entailed having Argentine forces land on the island, then immediately withdraw as a show of force and goodwill, but with time, the Junta became convinced that simply occupying the islands would be a better option. Britain seemed weak, with deep political divisions, an unpopular prime minister, and widespread unrest across Northern Ireland. In addition, the junta believed that the United States would back them, and the British had even reduced their already tiny naval presence on the islands in 1981, so they thought it was time to strike. Initially, they planned to start the operation in autumn of 1982, so that the then rough seas of the South Atlantic would further discourage the British from trying to retake the islands. But then something happened. Argentine soldiers that were tasked with setting up a secret presence on South Georgia Island caught British attention. This spooked the junta, which then made the decision to start the operation much earlier, and so on the 2nd of April 1982, the junta mounted its amphibious invasion of the Falklands, or Malvinas. Using your military like that generally violates international law. However, there is a way not to do that. By playing this video's sponsor, War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. What's that? More than 2,000 highly detailed tanks, planes, helicopters and ships, large immersive PvP battles, and no international court to prosecute you for destroying your enemies? Sign me up! Every vehicle is incredibly detailed and modeled down to their individual components, offering a highly immersive combat experience. The collection of vehicles in War Thunder spans over 100 years of development, from the 1920s to today, including the Falklands War, which is pretty cool. War Thunder has incredible graphics and detail in 4K resolution, authentic sound effects, and lovely music, creating a fully immersive atmosphere. Not only that, but you can play it now for free on PC, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5 and the previous console generation. By using my link, you can get a free large bonus pack with this stuff. Thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to use my link in the pinned comment for free bonus stuff. But back to the Falklands or Malvinas. Argentina's amphibious invasion was conducted with a relatively small force, which nonetheless significantly outnumbered the British troops stationed there. Although the British put up resistance, they ultimately had to concede defeat, and thus the islands were under Argentine control for the first time since the early 1830s. In Britain, there was widespread shock and anger when news of the landing arrived. Then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher first appealed to the United States for help, but the Reagan administration initially had no desire to get involved in an unimportant post-colonial dispute between two allies in the middle of the Cold War. So, the British took matters in their own hands. They organized a special task force which combined Royal Navy and civilian volunteer vessels to take the islands back. In addition, Prime Minister Thatcher declared an exclusion zone around the islands, which made any foreign vessel within it a possible military target. And by late April, US President Reagan had changed his position and publicly supported the British. When the task force finally arrived weeks later, it was met with reinforced Argentinian positions. Nonetheless, most of the Argentine troops were inexperienced, ill-equipped and badly supplied, especially after the British managed to secure naval dominance around the islands after controversially sinking an Argentine cruise vessel. The Argentinian Air Force meanwhile turned out to be a significant obstacle and caused major casualties on the British side, but eventually the British managed to land Royal Marines near the settlement of San Carlos. They were better equipped and more experienced than their Argentinian opponents, and from then on managed to push further and further while cutting off any supplies to the Argentinians. And on June 14, 1982, the commander of the Argentinian forces surrendered, thereby ending the war. It was a complete disaster for the junta, which achieved the exact opposite of their initial goals. Instead of taking the islands with little resistance, there was a fierce fight which they ultimately lost. Instead of legitimizing the junta's rule, it contributed to its downfall just 1 year later. And instead of demoralizing the British, it elevated the Falklands or Malvinas to an important national symbol across the United Kingdom and rebuilt British confidence on the world stage. Despite the toppling of the junta in 1983, relations between Argentina and Britain remained icy afterwards. The United Kingdom subsequently strengthened its local military presence while further integrating the islands into the British system. And although diplomatic relations between London and Buenos Aires were restored in 1989, the dispute over the Falklands or Malvinas remained unresolved. But what makes finding a solution to this conflict so difficult? Well, two reasons: their symbolic value and their material value. When it comes to the symbolic value, both Argentina and the United Kingdom are convinced of the historic and legal right to the islands. The United Kingdom argues that the islands have historically been British and that it is respecting the islanders' right to self-determination, as they overwhelmingly voted to remain part of the United Kingdom in 2013. Ceding the islands would not only be seen as an injustice to their nation, which sacrificed many lives for them in 1982, but also as an injustice to the local inhabitants who have lived there for generations and see themselves as British. Argentina meanwhile argues that the islands were Spanish up to Argentine independence and that the British resettlement of the islands in 1833 was illegal. They also argue that the islands are a natural part of Patagonia and that the right to self-determination does not apply to the current inhabitants of the islands, as they are not native to this land. Across Argentina, there are many monuments and even a museum dedicated to the island, which showcase the broad consensus across all Argentinian social classes and political spectrum that the islands are an essential part of Argentina and must eventually be returned. Something that was even enshrined in the 1994 Argentinian constitution. This is why giving up the claim to the islands is also not an option for Argentina. But there is also the material value of the Falklands or Malvinas. Due to their size and isolated geography, the islands offer some of the richest fishing grounds in the world and potentially hold significant oil reserves within the exclusive economic zone. Not only that, but the Falklands or Malvinas are also connected to the question of sovereignty over other territories in the vicinity, especially the Antarctic claims, which could become relevant in the future. All of this makes finding a solution incredibly difficult, and in recent years it seems that both parties are actually moving away from trying to find one. In 2023, Argentina withdrew from a 2016 agreement with the United Kingdom, which put the dispute aside in favor of building stronger economic ties. Instead, Argentina is seeking new negotiations, while British officials categorically reject any such talks. For this purpose, Argentina also increased its efforts to gain diplomatic support from across the world and international organizations like the United Nations. This shows how important the Falklands or Malvinas still are in the Argentine-British relationship, and has some wonder, could an escalation between Argentina and the United Kingdom happen again? Well, the likelihood of a new military conflict seems low at the moment. However, there have been some developments which could make the dispute more dangerous in the long term. In 2022, Argentina managed to gain China as a vocal supporter of their claim. This raised concerns that the dispute could become a geopolitical flashpoint in the future if a somewhat satisfying agreement on the Falklands or Malvinas cannot be found, and if Argentina and the United Kingdom end up on opposing sides of a new global Chinese-American rivalry. But geopolitics isn't the only danger here. Incidents like we see in the South China Sea are a possibility here as well, especially when considering Argentina's strong opposition to British oil exploration activities around the islands. Should Argentina take steps to hinder these activities, it could lead to a dangerous situation. Let's hope that both sides can find a peaceful solution instead. Thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to check out the pinned comment below for some free War Thunder goodies. Thanks for watching, and a big thank you to all my patrons and channel members for their support. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.